Welcome to the Trees and Lines podcast, where we discuss fresh perspectives on utility vegetation management with your hosts, Phil and Tej. Don't forget to follow along on LinkedIn for the latest news. Now, let's dive into this week's episode. Welcome to the Trees and Lines podcast. Today, Tej and I are welcoming back Dr. Carolyn Mahan out of the Penn State University. She is professor of biology and environmental studies, if I had that right, Carolyn.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, Carolyn, thank you for coming back and
welcome
us.
back.
I appreciate that.
Thanks for having me.
We were talking a little bit earlier about how you're back. You're talking about a study that's been around for decades, and everybody in the industry knows about it or should.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that's not the case, and our industry is growing so fast. Would you recap a little bit about State Game Lands 33, how it got started and what your work and your focus is today?
Okay, sure. So the State Game Lands 33 project takes place in the center of Pennsylvania, in Center County, Pennsylvania. And it started in the 1950s when a new transmission electric line was going across game lands. And hunters were concerned about that because they had heard that herbicides potentially would be used to control vegetation under this new transmission line. And they were concerned that that would affect wildlife populations. So Penn State and professors, Dr. Bramble, got involved at that time to see if that indeed was a valid hypothesis. Does the use of herbicides negatively affect wildlife? So the project started, and it was really designed well. It was designed as a true research project. Different treatments were set up along a section of the transmission line. Some treatments were absolutely zero herbicide, just hand cutting or mowing. Others used basal low volume applications of herbicides. Other sites used non-selective use application of herbicide. So it set up these replicates of different treatments. And then researchers went in and studied how plants responded and how wildlife responded. And immediately it was clear that game species like deer and ruffed grouse and wild turkey, they responded fine to anything. They're generalist species. They did great. The herbicides did not affect them at all. But one thing that did come out was that the sites that did not use any herbicide, the hand cutting and the mowing, the woody stems, the non-compatible woody stems, were much higher than sites that incorporated herbicide into their treatments. And then over time, what happened at State Game Lands 33 is these sites where herbicide was used as an integrated vegetation management. A stable early successional habitat developed. Less and less herbicide was needed to keep it in that stage. So that was great. And then Penn State continued to monitor, and they monitored how the different treatments affected native plants, not just non-compatible plants, but also how it affected rare species of pollinators and butterflies and breeding birds, snakes and reptiles. And all throughout this research, we have found that integrated vegetation management that incorporates herbicide application has been compatible with all of the native groups of species that we have studied. And so right now we are, Phil, I think it's in the 70th year or 75th year. I mean, it's been going on since 1955. So we've been doing research for a while. I have not been doing that research that amount of time. I was brought on, although I worked on the project as a graduate student in the early 90s. I took over as the head of the project in 2014.
Oh, very good. So, it's the same sites used to do different kinds of research. Is that right?
Yes, it's the same sites. Now, what has changed, and your audience would know this, what has changed is the types of herbicides available to use. So we do use the most, I guess what you would call the most up-to-date mixes at the site. And my research team does not dictate the mixes. We do not do the management. We don't do any of that. That's done by our partners. Asplunk does that in partnership with First Energy. And they also work with the Game Commission, who actually, the right-of-way goes over Game Commission land. So they do all of the actual management. What my team does is measures the response to that management. So we go out and then measure the response over time. The other thing I do want to mention that's really been, I would say, revolutionary in a way at State Game Lands 33 is this idea of the wire border zone, where you keep the vegetation under the wire zone lower, but you can allow the vegetation away from the wires to grow a little bit taller, to allow woody shrubs, small growing trees like the scrub oaks to persist there. And the border wire zone is really effective in promoting all sorts of wildlife. You might just want to call it in promoting native biodiversity.
Carolyn, does your research has it expanded to address other asset classes like pipelines? Are you very fixed on the utility side of things?
No, actually, and what I think I would like you to do, if you can share my website with your audience,
Sure.
we now have on my website, it's not transmission line ecology anymore, it's rights of way ecology, because
Okay.
our work has been picked up by the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. So I've now done work in roadside rights of ways.
Okay.
And for the past 3 years, I've been working with Shell Midstream on the Falcon Pipeline in Southwest
Hmm.
Pennsylvania, and we are taking these ideas of integrated vegetation management and applying them to pipelines. So, and because of our research, that Falcon pipeline that's over 100 miles that goes from Ohio through Monaca, Pennsylvania, this year they're putting all 100 miles into integrated vegetation management, which means it's going to be taken out of continuous mowing. And so that's
Okay.
been kind of exciting for us.
Carolyn, I don't know if you know that. I don't know if you know the answer to this. This is a question. So with the conflict overseas, there's obviously lots of the dialogue is around the oil constraints passing through the Strait of Hormuz. But the other big narrative was fertilizer.
Yeah.
Are you aware of like herbicide volume or like has that been impacted, like the supply and demand relationship of what's available to the market? Has that been disrupted at all?
I don't know, but I will say this. I don't know that part because, like I said, my team doesn't do the management. But what I do
Mm,
know is that when you look at these different, you call them assets, like the
hmm.
roadsides, the pipelines, the
Yep.
transmission lines, um, vegetation management is really expensive for them. It's a big part of their budget. I think it might be the most expensive part of their budgets. And I know it's getting more and more expensive. And that could be because of supply chain issues, which I don't know exactly what those would be, but it could
Yep.
be because of that. But what I do want to say, and I want the public to hear this as well as, your public and your listeners, most of these places don't want to just spray herbicide everywhere because it's expensive. So it's
Yeah.
in their best interest to use the least amount of herbicide that they can to control non-compatible plants, and to use it very selectively. And that's what I see with the partners I work with. That is what I see.
And when you're publishing your research, you obviously stated it here. I'm assuming you stated in your research, but like because you don't deal on the management side, right, of
Hmm.
the chemicals, et cetera. But I'm sure that variability there does impact the outcome and the results, et cetera. So like, is that just something that you guys are like, hey, like, yes, there could be a bunch of variability here with,
Oh yeah,
what, but, but this is what we're measuring and we have to make some assumptions. Like, how is that sort of
yeah,
managed given that that world could be changing? There's human
sure,
error, there's all kinds of stuff. So like, how is that sort of
yeah.
reflected?
Okay, so I will say this: all of our research goes through well, not pretty. It goes through standard scientific peer review. So that's really important to me. I always provide my partners with research reports and all the data, but then we always want our work to stand up to peer review. And you make a good point. I would say that a lot of the work that we do is very almost like a snapshot, but it's been done for so long now that there's really a lot of power in the data because it's been going on for 70 plus years and we're seeing the same results. The other thing that we're seeing happen with State Game Lands 33 is other researchers around the country are starting to do similar work. So there's work, for example, that's being done in California, and the Marathon Company is doing work in Ohio, and Shell Midstream is doing more work in Louisiana. And so as we researchers do more of this work and have these academic industry partnerships, we're seeing the same thing, that integrated vegetation management using selective herbicides, promoting habitats that are early successional and stable, provides great results for industry and biodiversity.
Um, Before we shift gears, because there's definitely something I want to get to today. We wanted to catch up on where the research was from our last discussion. But you were recently appointed as someone to represent the industry to speak in front of the House Committee of Natural Resource Management. Is that right?
Yes. Yep. Yep.
But before we jump into that, I do have a question. So education, higher education is, I'll say, like going through like some sort of reform. Funding was a big topic,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
lots of changes
Yeah, that's a good way of putting
across
it.
the educational landscape. Yes, I'm trying to be as elegant as I can. But where do you guys sit? How has your funding been managed? Are you protected through all this
Yeah, it's a great,
volatility?
yeah,
How are you surviving this
yeah.
time period?
Well, I will first say I'm really grateful to my industry partners because they have stayed committed to this research. But
That's
I'm
great.
also really grateful that I'm part of academia. And I'll give you I'm going to give you the Shell Midstream as just an example. It's true for the State Game Lands project. So to be honest, when Shell Midstream approached me and asked me to do similar work on a right of way, I wasn't that excited about it because Shell has been a good partner in Pennsylvania, but Shell as a whole, or oil and gas as a whole, sometimes doesn't have the best ecological reputation. But I will say this, working with these people at Shell, it's all about relationships. We developed a great sense of trust. And when I said I would work with them, I said I want it to be set up not as a demonstration plot. I said, I'm not interested in like planting flowers and counting bees. I said, we need to set it up like State Game Lands 33, where we have different treatments that, including controls, that we are measuring biodiversity across. They were great partners. And the other thing that I had to do is when you work with Penn State, the industry partners work with Penn State, people above me in the research office, they work out agreements. So let's pretend I did not find this. This is a caveat. I did not find this, but let's say I find out that integrated vegetation management, there wasn't one insect on those sites. In fact, we found the opposite. We found a lot of insects on those sites, the most, in fact. But the industry has no control over what I publish. And so everything that we publish is protected by the research office at Penn State. So I will say that is the value of the academic industrial partnership. Because if Shell just goes out and says, oh, this is what we're doing and it's good for insects, it's good for plants, there's a lack of perhaps believability in their message.
Yeah, there's a bias.
There's a bias. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I make it very clear that they gave up these industry partners gave up that right to control what we publish. Your other part of your question was about funding, sources of funding. So I will say this, everyone's getting pressured. And right now in Pennsylvania, electric rates are really going up quickly. I think they're going up around the country for a variety of reasons. And so there has been some pressure against the research. So you can imagine you're a VP and you're thinking, oh, I got to save money this year. I can't have electric rates keep going up. Maybe an easy option is to cancel the State Game Lands research project. That has not happened, but it's important for us as the researchers to tell our story, to demonstrate why it's valuable for the industry, why it's valuable for the relationships with the public. And that's on my research team. And so we've been able to keep it going at the same level of funding, but it's always a challenge. And I would say right now with rising electric rates, it's a big challenge right now.
Okay.
But
Thank
we're
you for
doing
that.
fine, Tej. We're doing fine. We're submitting our grant for the next 3 years, so I don't want it
No,
to
it's
imply that,
great.
oh, they're shutting our funding down. It's just
No,
we
no,
have
no,
to
no.
continually justify why we're doing the work.
Yeah, look, I think what's great is, you know, when people read the news cycle and the headlines and this is getting shut and that's getting shut. Look, I think the mix of industry
Yeah.
support, people like yourself who are championing, important research, the
Hmm.
funding that is available through the grant system. I think it all has to kind of work together to keep things going, right? Like everyone's a player in supporting this. And I think
Well, yeah.
it's
But
important
the
research.
criticism that comes in, this is where I kind of mentioned the research offices, because criticism can come in on the ecology side where they say, well, Professor Mahan, you're taking money from industry and that's
Hmm.
biasing your research. And if the National Science Foundation was funding it, we wouldn't have to worry about it. And that's why I always have to make clear that industry does provide the funds, but the way we have it set up, at least at Penn State, is they do not have a control on our research outcomes or publishing those research outcomes. And so to me, that's critical. And I have to make that always clear to audiences.
Yeah. I think like if I was, I think a counter to that, and what I would say to that person or the people in the academia world that want to sort of be more insular is I'm like, look, you know, theoretically everything is awesome, but if you don't know how it's applied or you're not communicating with the
Yeah.
people that are utilizing it and monetizing it or using it to progress, right, a variety of
Yeah.
things, like who cares, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I think industry is important because they bring, a practical implementation side of,
Yeah.
that enhances the research. But you're right, like it's a fine balance. It's art and science because, you don't want industry to necessarily abuse that avenue as well. So like, it just has to be governed, right? There has to be
Yes,
governance and,
exactly.
and all that stuff. So
And
no, I
I
think
do want,
that's
as
fantastic.
an academic, I do have to say here, I think purely hypothesis driven research that is just creative is important. That's not what I do. I do applied research, and those are very different fields. And
Hmm.
my concern as an academic, I'll get on my, is that I don't want to see the creative side of research go away either, because people are doing amazing stuff. And that's where the surprises come, right? That's where the
Right.
surprises of research come. But I think
Yeah.
applied research is really important. It makes sense that that's where industry would fund.
Yep.
And I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, again, I think there's a place for all of it, right?
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
um, well, I definitely want to get to, transitioning. So first of all, how are you selected, right,
Okay.
as the face of like this industry? And are you representing in front of the house like all of vegetation management? Are you like
Uh,
what are you? Who are you the face of? And
that's a
and why
great
were you
question.
and why were
Yeah.
you
Let me
selected?
interject the how. I believe
Okay, Phil.
phone
Yeah.
call came
How,
through the right of way stewardship accreditation program through the council. And
Yes.
the House
boom.
needed
There
an
you go.
expert, and the consensus was Dr. Mahan would represent our industry to the House committee better than anyone
Yep.
else. And she said yes.
Yes. So
Awesome.
yes, just like Phil said, it was the right of way stewardship council. I am a member of that council. I'm an academic representation on that council. And so when the request came through, it went out to the entire council, if you remember, Phil. And it was very short notice. And I was able to go. I had to prepare a 1-page statement. I was able to go. And I will say, though, is I represent, who did I represent? So I represent Carolyn Mahan, Penn State researcher. So I'm not there as an advocate for any side. I was just there to present what we have found in our research. And what we were discussing in particular was something called the Fix Our Forests Act. They call it FOFA because Washington, D.C. loves an acronym. and it has passed through Congress, the House, and it's in the Senate right now. And it's a bipartisan bill, which is amazing in these days and this time. But there's certain senators that had some, I would say, objections to some of the wording in the bill. And so I was kind of brought in to give my perspective on how I would fix our forests. And when you say fix our forests, what the act is looking at are ways on federally owned lands, in particular BLM lands, and so that's Bureau of Land Management, and U.S. Forest Service lands, these multi-use landscapes. How are there, what are things that should be permitted for management? What things could maybe be categorical exceptions? So, for example, if a right-of-way is going across federal lands, can we get rapid categorical exceptions to remove trees, for example, that are interacting with power lines? So that's the type of thing that they're looking at in this bill. Now, some people would say you could be very generalistic and say, oh, this bill is anti-regulation. And I don't think it is. I think it's a way to make regulations work smarter and more effectively. And so that's why I was brought in, and kind of to talk about those sorts of things. One of their biggest interests were forests in the Western landscapes, and how can properly manage in rights of ways under transmission lines, how can that affect with forest fire issues? So that's not what I do my research on, but I'm pretty familiar with this whole idea of managing rights of ways, and even how that applies in Western landscapes.
So where, where is the bill now? What's the status of it? Tell us a little bit about that.
So,
and
okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that's in the bill, for example, that's up for contention is there is some language that indicates that electric companies should be able to manage trees, e.g. remove trees that could interfere with power lines, transmission lines, up to like 100 feet or 150 feet, whatever that language is.
Right.
And people who oppose that say, well, that seems pretty arbitrary. What are you basing that on? So they'd like to see that maybe 150 feet is perfect for Appalachian, the Allegheny National Forest, but actually maybe in California, you would need 200 feet. So those sorts of things. So they wanted to see it be a little bit more science-based. The other side is people see, well, if we just allow electric companies to remove any tree they want, then our forests aren't protected. So it's this kind of balance between people who want to save every tree, and there are people like that, and there are people who have to deliver reliable, safe energy. And I'm here to say, our research shows you can do both. You can easily do both. They showed pictures at this particular testimony of very overgrown rights of ways. And when I look at that, I said this in my testimony, I said, I see potential there. Like, this is habitat management. We know how to do this. Professionals know how to do this. And you can remove ponderosa pine, for example, and promote an early successional habitat that's suitable to that part of the West. So it's really about education and people not being afraid. People, ecologists, ecology people, well-meaning people shouldn't be afraid, as long as the companies are committing to doing the management correctly. And I think we can set up those boundaries on some of the sites.
Does the bill is the bill just setting rules and standards, or is the bill going to be tied to funding that gets rolled into some federal agency that will act and govern the entire system? Like
I don't know if that has been worked out yet. And so, to be honest, what they told me in DC was, thank you so much for your testimony. They were very grateful because and to be honest, I was brought down by a Democrat, and they thought the Republicans on the committee wouldn't even talk to me, but they were very engaged. They were very interested in what I was saying. But they were very honest, and they said, nothing is going to move on this bill, let's be honest, till after the midterms. Just nothing will. So
Yeah.
what I think I would like to do is after the midterms are over and they know who's in charge, because whoever's in charge of the House and Senate, they're the person who decides which comes forward on this House Resource Committee. So once we know what that is, then I would like to go back down, work with them on language. As far as is there funding, I am not sure, but there could be incentives. So one of the things, Phil, I think you'd be interested in that I brought up things that if you are an accredited utility, if you are accredited, you should be granted categorical exception to remove trees, because that would be a impetus for people to get accredited. The public can feel good about the companies that are doing this know what they're doing. And it would be very similar to what we had the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, where, Home Depot now likes to buy 50% of their lumber from these types of places. So I want to see that kind of partnership. And so that when people get accreditation, when I say people, I mean industry companies, it's really meaningful. And I think that's one way to do this. And so those are things that I'll be bringing forward.
Certainly make the value of accreditation more tangible to the utilities.
I think so too. Yeah, I think so too. And I think it could also make it, me, I'm very interested in vegetation management and proper habitat management being adopted at scale. How is it going to get adopted at scale? There's going to have to be more incentives for companies to do it. That's what I think.
So, Carolyn, who pushes back on IBM these days? I mean, the NGOs see it as a best practice. I think government agencies see it as best practice. Academia, who is
the public does. The public. I was asked, I'll give you just two quick examples. Just this spring, I was asked by a nonprofit. They manage a piece of forest and a distribution line goes through. Distribution lines are challenging. I want you guys to know that, because they're much narrower. But I was brought down and, these people were looking at me and all I could see, Phil, was invasive plants. And they told me, they're like, and this is what they said to me: "Don't worry, Professor Mahan, we don't use any herbicide." I said, "Why are you saying that? Have you not read my research?" And they're like, no, you promote biodiversity. And in their minds, herbicide is anti-biodiversity. So they hand pull Japanese knotweed, Japanese barberry. And guess what? It comes back the next year. It's a continual battle. And I'm like, you really can just squirt that plant and kill it and let the native plants come in. So the public, I'm fighting with them. I just had a phone call last week with an organic farmer. He had a no spray zone, and one of the contractors for First Energy sprayed, and he's like, now I no longer have an organic farm and I know all these poisons are in my well water. I'm like, hold on. And it turned out okay, Phil. Like he talked to First Energy, and everything is fine now. But it's very reactive on the public side. You have reaction on the public side. They call their representatives, and so there's reaction on the representative side. And I am not in favor of, our research shows that high volume foliar, where you just spray every plant, that's no better than mowing. It just isn't. So I'm not like, yeah, take all your herbicides and spray them everywhere. But we know that selective herbicide works. All conservation organizations use it. But it's not getting out to the general public. And also the general public thinks about herbicides and insecticides as the same thing. So much work has to go on. And it has to be the right people explaining it. So if First Energy comes in, they don't believe them, but they call me at Penn State and I can talk to them and they're okay. So that's who's pushing back. It's the public, and it's not insignificant.
So you push IBM, but some of your interest is also in promoting the use of natural seed bank. Is that?
Yeah. So right now, this is going to be more related to pipeline rights of way, because pipeline rights of ways, when they go in, they're putting the pipeline in the ground, as you guys probably know. So they go in, they take the topsoil off, they put it to the side, they put the pipeline in, and we're talking like 12-inch pipelines, 18-inch pipes. They're putting those into the ground, and then they're putting the topsoil back. Well, that topsoil, as I know, is filled with seeds. Right? That topsoil was filled with the seed bank that was there. But in Pennsylvania, the Department of Environmental Protection has rules about green up. How quickly is that soil covered? What we know is that plants that green up quickly for erosion purposes often have very shallow roots. That's why they're green, because they put all their energy into their leaves that you can see, but the roots are shallow. So I want to work really hard with DEP to allow the native seed bank to respond first, because those mostly have perennial plants that have deep roots. Deep rooted plants is really what stops the erosion. And if we can wait for them, maybe that means your waiting period for green up is an extra month, right? Maybe it's more than 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Then we can see what native plants are coming up. Are they perennials? Are they deep rooted? Because when you seed it with like lawn grasses or clover, greens up very quickly, but those little plants compete with the native plants, and I think long term is not as effective. Having said that, on steep slopes, you got to seed, because the steep slopes, you have to get those plants established really quickly because the erosion will occur quickly. But so I'm talking about flat areas where companies have done a really good job of holding on to that topsoil. And it was interesting. I had a conversation in the field with DEP, and they said, well, they have to put the seed down. I said, it is. That topsoil is filled with seed. And they said, but we don't know how many seeds. I said, okay, so we can count them. So that's something that I'm working on, and I would really like to see the use of the seed bank at least studied a bit more, because that's really, really expensive to buy seeds, especially if you're going to buy the right seed mix. And I want companies to buy the right seed mix. But let's use seed mixes where they're really necessary, and they're not. I don't think, I'm hedging my bets because I'm doing some research right now, but I don't think they're absolutely necessary everywhere.
Yeah.
Like think about State Game Lands 33, for example. That was never seeded.
Right.
Right. Everything that's up on State Game Lands 33 came back naturally. So, but the soil wasn't disturbed to the same level as on a pipeline. But anyway, so that's kind of the research that I'm looking at, Phil. And we have a Marathon has been great. They're allowing us to do a small study site, looking at these comparisons as a seed mix versus just putting a little bit of straw on the topsoil back.
So Caroline, before we let you go today, just from your career trajectory at this point, like, would you ever consider, going into industry full time, or are you in a sweet spot because you get to keep one foot, in the research world and then another foot, with industry, and just sort of connecting those dots? Like, what are your future plans in terms of what's next?
I think my value is that I'm in academia. I think that's the value. And I think academics and industry have different goals, different objectives, and different kind of reward systems. So I am incentivized to do good research and publish good research that stands up to peer review, and how that research is utilized is up to the industry. I can put it out there, I can promote it. I think if I was in industry, actually working for industry, I don't think I would have the same incentives. I think I might be more incentivized to save money, for example, which makes sense from an industry perspective. And IVM is completely compatible with that. But I don't think I would be as credible to the public if I did that. So I like where I am. I would like to continue working with industry. As far as my career, I was just talking to Phil. If I retired from Penn State, what you can do at a university is you can become what's called emeritus status. So you're still affiliated with the university. I'd be an emeritus professor, which means you could still run your research through the university. I just don't have to go to like department meetings every week and grade papers and things like that. So that sounds like the best of both worlds to me.
Well, this was a pretty fantastic chat, and we're gonna have to do part 3, and get an update and track this bill as well. I'm very interested to see how this all shapes up. I think we
should talk. Yeah, let's try and talk
post
next
midterms.
winter. After the midterms.
It's a good idea.
I think that things are going to move quickly. I think even Democrat or Republican, I do think things are going to move quickly on this bill. I think it will happen. Like I said, it will be next winter. Things will start moving.
Very
No,
good.
we'll definitely get on your calendar and schedule.
Okay.
But this was great. Thanks for making time for us. This was a fantastic chat.
You're welcome. It's great to be
Nice
here.
seeing you, Carolyn.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You too, Phil.
Thanks for joining us today. Follow us on LinkedIn for updates and to tune in again to the Trees and Lines podcast.